Rick Santelli's rant was pre-planned, right-wing scam designed to torpedo Obama's economic agenda. That's the headline by John Amato, and it is so straight on. Mark Yames and Yasha Levine of Playboy magazine actually did the original reporting. And this is from their article. Last week, CNBC correspondent Rick Santelli rocketed from being a little-known second-string correspondent to a populist of the disenfranchised, a 21st century Sam Adams, the leader and symbol of downtrodden America. His rant last week on Chicago Tea Party to protest Obama's plan to help distressed homeowners rapidly spread across the blogosphere, etc. What we discovered is that Santelli's rant was not at all spontaneous, as his alleged fans claim, but rather it was carefully planned trigger for the anti-Obama campaign. In PR terms, his February 19th call for a Chicago Tea Party was the launch event of a carefully organized and sophisticated PR campaign, one in which Santelli served as a frontman using the CNBC airwaves for publicity for some of the craziest and sleaziest right-wing oligarch clans this country has ever produced, namely the Koch family, the multi-billionaire owners of the largest private corporation in America, and funders of scores of right-wing think tanks and advocacy groups from the Cato Institute and Reason Magazine to Freedom Works. The scion of the Koch family, Fred Koch, was co-founder of the notorious extremist right-wing John Birch Society. As you read this, big business is pouring tens of millions of dollars into their media machines in order to destroy just about every economic campaign promise Obama has made, as recently reported in the Wall Street Journal. At stake isn't a little guy's fight against big government, as Santelli and his bot supporters claim, but rather the upper 2%'s war to protect their wealth from the Obama administration's economic plans. When this Santelli grassroots campaign is peeled open, what's revealed is a glimpse of what's ahead and what is bound to be a hallmark of this presidency. And then the entire article in Playboy is titled "Backstabber: Is Rick Santelli High on Koch?" And it's just, I'm telling you, this is AstroTurf. This is AstroTurf. And it's not only that, it's sick and twisted AstroTurf, because the real Boston Tea Party was a protest against the British East India Company. You know, I wrote about this in Unequal Protection. I wrote about it in What Would Jefferson Do? There was a book published in the early 1900s. It was titled A Retrospect of the Boston Tea Party and a Memoir of George R.T. Hughes, a survivor of the little band of patriots who drowned the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773. Now, when I was writing Unequal Protection, I started this, I started out with the founders. I started actually originally to write a biography of Jefferson. That ended up happening later, a book about Jefferson. And I came across this book and bought a used, this is the only book that has ever been published by somebody who was actually at the Boston Tea Party, because these guys swore an oath of silence, an oath of secrecy. And all of them, with the single exception of George Robert Twelvetree Hughes, who wrote this book, all of the rest of them went to their graves without ever talking about the Boston Tea Party. And he wrote this almost 50 years later. He was only 16, 17 years old when it happened, when most of the rest of them were dead. And he felt that he was thus keeping the oath. The account was actually published 61 years later. And here's what he writes. The East India Company received permission to transport tea, free of all duty, from Great Britain to America. Now, the purpose for this was to wipe out New England-based tea wholesalers and the mom-and-pop shops. Hence, it is no longer the small vessels of private merchants who went to vend tea for their own account in the ports of the colonies, but on the contrary, ships of an enormous burthen that transported immense quantities of this commodity. The colonies were now arrived at the decisive moment when they must cast the die and determine their course. Now, there were also, bloggers of the day. They were called pamphleteers. One of the most famous was Rusticus. And Rusticus, he published a blog called The Alarm. They would nail these things to houses and trees. And this is one he wrote about the coming Tea Party. He said, "Are we in like manner to be given up to the disposal of the East India Company?" See, the Tea Party was the protest of the colonists against the modern day, their then equivalent of Walmart. Are we in like manner to be given up to the disposal of the East India Company, who now have the assurance to step forth in aid of the minister to execute his plan of enslaving America? This corporation's conduct in Asia for some years past has given simple proof how little they regard the laws of nature, the laws of nations, the rights, liberties, or lives of men. They have levied war, excited rebellions, dethroned lawful princes, and sacrificed millions for the sake of profits. The revenues of mighty kingdoms have centered in their coffers, and these not being sufficient to glut their avarice, they have, by the most unparalleled barbarities, extortions, and corporate monopolies, stripped the miserable inhabitants of their property and reduced whole nations to indigence and ruin. 1,500,000, it is said, perished by famine in 1 year, not because the earth denied its fruits, but because this company and their servants engulfed all the necessities of life and set them at so high a price that the poor could not purchase them. Resolve, Rusticus said, nobly resolve, and publish to the world your resolutions, that no men will receive the tea from this corporation.